Okay, so welcome to track 4, which is talking a little bit about the apps, means the tiny little helpers tools we had worked on and already finished, and some are in process and some are still to be started. So the reason why we are focusing on apps is very simple. In the today's world, of course, nearly everybody is using a smartphone and has it with it. And I think the most accepted way to work with such tools is to have an app on your smartphone. So, and technologies are quite fancy on that one. And as I said, some apps are already available, others are still in process, and others are still to be started. Nevertheless, what was mentioned before in the first session, really we need the input from the audience, from the airline people, from the front line about such apps they would like to have and to work with. So please make use of that Q&A option on the top right, where you also can not only ask questions, maybe you can also throw in some ideas or wishes you might have. Yeah. So this is what we are going to talk about. A quick reminder, more or less, about the WindSpeed app, which was developed by Dominic C. Already existing. Then we have the Strap Angles app, which was developed by Blair. This was already existing, but there are quite some interesting news, but we'll talk about later on because he recently had a nice chat with Blair about his new developments. Then we're going to talk about the EUCR, also taken up by Bob, which I consider as part of the state-of-the-art improvement of the Uld system, making it or bringing it from paper-based documents to the state-of-the-art online stuff. Then we're going to talk about Uld Damage Inspection, and last but not least about the Contour Check app. So let's quickly switch over to the WindSpeed app. As said, already existing. It's a question if you can consider it an app. It's actually a nice Excel file, but you can download that, as you can see on the bottom here, in different kinds of formats from the ULD Care website. Yeah, and if you have it on your tool, we can call it, if you have it on your smartphone, I think we can call it an app. Yeah. This is more or less what it will provide you. There is a list of different types of containers because that makes sense for containers. And it's about the risk level of wind speed where an empty container might be blown away or off the high loader. Yeah. So what you do, you pick your container type, you enter the empty tear weight, and you automatically will get the critical wind speed in the two different systems. And you can use that either as an entire table, fill it in for everything you have, or case by case, however you need that. I personally think it's a quite handy tool. I'm wondering how many people are aware of that and the general climate change. So it might become more important in the future. And don't forget, ULDs also get lighter. So the next part is then again talking about strap angles, and this is now Bob's part. And I stop sharing. And then Bob, it's your turn. Bob, you still are on mute.
Screen, hang on, I'm trying to work out why it didn't share my screen. Hang on a second, share. I believe you can now. No, sorry, hang on a second. I have a small technical hitch here.
Or shall I share my screen and guide you through?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Then I will quickly share my screen again. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the strap angle app. This was something that came about from a discussion perhaps 3, even 4 years ago. Straps have always been right at the very bottom of the food chain, but the National Air Cargo accident in Bagram really moved this forward, because that was caused entirely by poor strapping design and poor strapping application. And the FAA decided to take this to task. TSO C90A included a great deal of information about new regulations surrounding the whole question of the use of straps. And basically, the challenge here is it's all very well if it's just a nice single square box, but what if it's something complicated and a lot of straps are required? How are you going to know that the straps have been installed correctly? And the idea is to build an app that will enable you to check the installation of the straps. So if you could move to the next slide, please, all. This was the Mark 1 version, which is basically a very simple app that did the basics. It determined the angle of the strap, because it is the angle of the strap that at the end of the day is most critical to the strength of the strap, to its ability to withstand the load. And the app did that very well. But we realized once we completed that design, that this was really only part way through. So then we moved on to the next app, and this is what's work in progress at the moment. These are some screenshots that Blair sent me a couple of weeks ago. Basically, this works on the premise that somebody, the special cargo functions person, who's a head office person, has to do the design for any strapping application, and that's where the cargo is not underneath a net. If it's underneath the net, it's another story. But if it's not underneath the net, then it requires this special process. So the person sitting in the head office sits down. He knows the pallet size. If you look on the right, he knows on the left rather, he knows the load. So in this case, it's a Mercedes. It weighs 2,100 kilograms. He knows the airline it's going to go on. He even knows the aircraft it's going to go on, the position, and the main deck. And he knows that it's going to need 8 straps. So then he moves to the next screen, which is the pallet details. So here you can see it's an R-size pallet. It could have been an A, a B, a G, or an M. And basically this shows the allowable locations for each of the tie-down fittings. If you can move to the next slide, please, Ulf. So now in the step 3, you've now got the unit, in this case the car, it just shows the chassis obviously, secured on the pallet. And on the phone you would be able to rotate this schematic, so you would be able to see the exactly correct location of all the different straps. And then on the 4th screen, this is where it does the calculations. It does a computation for the load on each strap, and at the bottom it ticks. And you can see we've got forward, aft, left, right, and up. And this is the sort of thing that the captain could very well want to see, because he's going to come back down to the loading, see some heavy piece of equipment being loaded and say, how do we know that's strong enough? And the app does exactly that for him. So, and the next slide, please, Ulf. So what I've already shown you is already fully functional, but the magic bit here is augmented reality. And I made up this little augmented reality picture where I took a photograph of my computer screen, but I put an image of a tent onto the keyboard. I don't know if any of you have played with augmented reality, but it's the ability to mix images, computer-generated images, with photographs. And the idea is that the app will be able to take a photograph of the, or just see the image of the strapping and overlay the required strapping against it, and then say, oh, it's good, or no, it's not good. So this is still work in progress. Blair tells me we're nearly there. It'll initially be iOS, but then eventually it'll be Android as well. And we think this could be a real game changer. Okay, and the next slide, please. Right, so the next app is the EUCR. And this is something that we've been working on now for a year and a half, I suppose. So the paper-based URD control receipt, which is IATA RP 1654, goes back to the 1970s. Look at this. You have the original white, part 2 green, part 3 yellow, part 4 pink. I don't know any process today that uses white, green, yellow, and pink copies. I mean, it is so historical. Next slide, please. Oh. So the URD control receipt does, however, have some positives. The data in the URCR remains 95% valid today as 50 years ago. We have a universal URD numbering system. We don't need to deal with variations or national variations and so on. And it is an IATA standard, and that's great. That really makes life a lot easier. But the negatives, it's paper-based, which means it's slow, it's inaccurate, and a lot of time they just get lost. And the next slide, please, Ulf. So here are some app screenshots of the beta version of the URD electronic UCR app. In shot 1, you acquire the URD ID through taking a photo or entering it manually. It's not difficult to do, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. In screen 2, you start to record the condition. So is it serviceable, damaged, or unserviceable? Also, how many nets, straps, fittings, fire covers, etc. And then in the third screen, we set up the transfer details. Is it an incoming? Are we receiving it? Is it outgoing? Are we sending it out? Who is the counterparty? And if we can move to the next screen. Now, I'm going to just put this on hold for a minute because I'm going to bring in RFID, and you heard me mentioning it earlier. The challenge with using any photo recognition is palette marking. Again, I've talked about this during the panel session earlier, and you can see here the sort of challenge you face with identifying a stack of pallets. But here's the good news. RFID may very well be back in a very usable way. First of all, today's RFID chips work well when you place them on a metal surface. That used to be a problem. It's not a problem anymore. Secondly, the reading technology is now far more adaptable and portable. If you look at the device in the right-hand picture, that's basically an Android-compatible RFID scanner. Handheld, these are not expensive. We think they're multifunction. They can also read barcodes. They can also have photo ID. They're multi-purpose. And they're both falling in price, both the tags, which are increasingly small and so can easily be mounted on a pallet, and the readers are falling in price. So big question, can the new RFID tech change the URD identification story? I think it's a possibility. Next slide, please, Ulf. So coming back to the app, you enter the counterpart, and the reason I jumped to the RFID there because the app works extremely well on a container. It works pretty well identifying a single pallet. It can generally read the ID codes on a single loaded pallet, but it's a struggle when it's got a big stack of 15 or 20. So here in screen 4, we enter the counterparty name. So the person you're receiving from or transferring to. As I said, you select whether it's an incoming or outgoing, and in 5, and then 6, you enter the actual name. So the name of the person, in this case, John Smith, who is the party doing the transfer. And then next slide, please, Ulf. Here we go. And now he's signed on the screen, just like you sign for your credit card transactions these days. And then the next thing is, if you look towards the bottom, you'll see publish now or publish later. So you click publish now, and off it goes, and it gets processed. And here you can see in the right-hand side, you can see a listing of transfers that have been carried out on this device. And the next slide, please, Ulf. And here we go. This, I think, is the cream on the cake, because what you've got here on the left is a IATA standard UCR. On the right is a PDF UCR of an actual transfer that has been basically created on the handheld app and has gone back to a server, which in turn has emailed out to the PDF UCR, because the UCR at the end of the day is the essential legal document. And I think that may be almost, no, I think there's one more of my slides. Here you can actually see pictures of the app in use, reading a container on an LD3 and being used to read the ID off a pallet. You can see here PMC 30950DS. Okay, I think maybe that's back to Ulf.
Correct. Now we make the switch. And by the way, just one additional comment on that reading of the ID code with the QR codes. That's probably even easier then and more automatic. Yeah. But next topic we talk about is the Uld Damage Inspection App. Initially, the idea was that this is a kind of a standalone topic and maybe quite complicated. Therefore, on our time frame, as you might remember on the roadmap, it was more or less pushed a bit to the future in 23, something like that. But in the meantime, when we go back to that one, and you see the left picture, we're taking a picture and there's a damage, and this is somewhere also included in the report here, service damage unserviceable. Yeah, this was a beautiful link, more or less, for the damage limitation. So the serviceability of a Uld is one of the core parts of a Uld transfer. If it's not serviceable, you cannot transfer because you can use it. And there are other consequences to be followed. The serviceability criteria themselves, they are defined by the already existing ODLN. On the right, you see an example, and here are some specifics on there. Yeah. So a Uld, which has damages which are within the ODLN limits, is to be considered serviceable, and if it's exceeding the limits, it's unserviceable. Very simple. So when we know, and the question was always how to identify and how to measure the damage, the actual damage versus the limit shown on the Uld. Yeah. And if we now can combine the capabilities of most smartphones, which have already a measuring app included, like even my old iPhone 8, which I just recently recognized, I didn't know that up front, you can actually take measurements and you can take a picture. And if we combine that with the EUCR process and app as part of the reporting, and if we combine that and make use of by the IATA ULDR defined damage codes, I think we can really kill several birds with one stone. So more or less the idea is stepping in where Bob more or less stopped. Before you send the report, step one would be a visual check of the ULD. You just walk around, and if you do not find any damage, then you just click on no, and then it will more or less finish the report and also clearly shows that the ULD is serviceable. If there are damages, then you click on yes, and then it would move on to the built-in measuring tab, where you can actually get the measurements of the actual damage. If we first make the selection of the damage code, that will later on help to allocate it when you check it against the ODLN. So you have that damage, you use the tool, you got the dimensions, you take the picture, saved. Then you go to the next damage. For instance, here where you have this smaller cut, as we have seen, next damage. Here you don't even need a measurement because it's completely cracked. And then there are no further damages, so you go back to the report. The next level would then be that on your app, it will show you a kind of a consolidated report with the different damages which you have identified, showing the dimensions. And with that one, you actually have to walk still physically because it's too complicated with all ODLN limitations. They are so different from all ULDs and manufacturers. But here you have visually in front of you on your cell phone, you have what you had measured with the damage code. And then you go and compare it with the ODLN limits. And you only have to check the ODLN sticker for SB. So it's all aligned. And then you can check, okay, this damage exceeds, for instance, the limits as given here on the ODLN. So you click on that button, and then it will automatically make this type of damage an unserviceable condition. Then you go to the next, and so on. Actually, if you have already one unserviceable, you could stop, but you want to report the entire condition of the ULD. Yeah. So you go through that process, and then when you're ready, then you click on the arrow here, and then you can finish the report. Then we go back more or less where Bob stopped his part. You create the entire report, but here with the condition ULD is unserviceable. And then you have all the records and everything nicely together. So that's the idea. Hopefully, because none of us is really an IT expert, hopefully we can, I call it abuse, the people Bob is working on the EUCR, and hopefully they can give us support to make that happen and bring it to life. So that's the damage limitation or damage inspection app. And the next is just still an idea. It's about the contour check app. I mean, one of the problems in the ULD industry is specifically on pallets, how to identify if a pallet after it's loaded is still within the contour. Same applies to containers. If they are damaged or really out of contour, sometimes it's not easy to identify. You only find it out more or less the moment you try to load it on board of the aircraft, when it got stuck and creates damages to the aircraft. And this is not what anybody would like to see, because it's very expensive and creates delays. Yeah. So better to check it up front. And here we, I think, can also make use of the nice tools of the smartphones with the camera. Yeah. So we have the integrated camera, and the idea is more or less to build a kind of a database where you first select the base code or the base size by its code as defined in the IATA ULDR. And this is the dimension which is clearly defined on whatever ULD and whatever contour we are talking about. After that step, you go and select the contour you want to check. Is it the main deck? And then you have different combinations. For instance, for the M size base, you have A/B or D or J, L, B, X contours on the main deck, and for the lower deck you have F, K, P, U. The moment you have selected that one, it gives you a kind of a preview, including dimensions on the front view and the side view, how it should look like. Here are some other options which will come later on, because here, for instance, I still use the the M size base, but a lower deck F contour. So when you have that one, then you take your phone and the ideal contour as defined in the ULDR is shown on your screen with some kind of catching corners for the base, because as I said, this is the defined size. So you now go to the container or palette you want to check from the side. You select the view. If you first want to check the side view, you select the side view. And then you actually zoom in until the actual base corners fit into that red corner symbol here. Yeah. And then, by the way, it's quite easy to check, are you still within the contour or not? So with this palette, with that example, it's nicely shown inside. With this one, which is then the lower deck F contour, which I've chosen here, there you see it looks nice, but the moment you zoom in, then you see there is, or there seems to be, a problem here. In this case, it might has to do something with the pictures I had available from the web. They were not always in the right angle, but at least this is a great indicator here. Something is fishy. Yeah. And by the way, you also can change the view while you are, because sorry, I quickly have to go back here. Depends on from which side you go. There is a little button here where you can just mirror image the view. And it also shows you always what contour you are looking for and what view you are currently in. Same here on the lower deck container. So the next step, the moment you have taken that zoomed in and you took the proper measurement, you just click create a picture, and then you create a report. The report includes an ID code, date, location, name. It also shows the contour, and by the ID code you have already the base size. Yeah, and then you can save it and send, and that's the idea behind. So if anybody has any questions on that one, I see there is one. Oh, this is from Christine, but Christine, this is what, do you think it's realistic that a considerable amount of ULD gets equipped with RFID? Okay, I think this is not the right track to discuss RFID.
Well, Ulf, maybe I can respond to that.
Yeah. Before you respond on that one,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to encourage really everybody, just give some feedback via the Q&A option. If these ideas are realistic, if they make sense also in real life, and also if you have some other ideas for the future. So just throw in, because it's going to be recorded. So we don't have to tackle it right now. We can do that afterwards. So, Bob.
Yeah, Christine, it's a very good question. And I think to answer this, you need two converging motivations. I don't know if you spent time on track one, where we talked about our ambitions to build a demurrage, a universal demurrage for ULD outside of the current IULD UG, which I know you're very familiar with. And so we need to have there's no point in spending money putting RFID tags on ULD unless there's a direct financial benefit. That's very clear to me. And I think there can be, because if airlines are going to be able to charge demurrage, and we've already seen, I mean, in the shipping industry, it's billions of dollars. In the rail industry, it's $500 million. I'm not sure whether it'll be that much in the air cargo industry, but I suspect it will be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, because the freight forwarding community is just not efficient enough to return the stuff promptly. But the other side of the equation is that technology is moving in the right direction. I mean, a typical, I haven't done a great deal of research on it, but what I understand is the cost of well, let me back up and say also, RFID tags that we talked about 5, 10, 20 years ago are completely different animals to what we're talking about now. When we talked about RFID in those days, it was kind of like the idea that you'd have a radar scanner on top of the cargo terminal, and it would be able to detect an RFID equipped pallet half a mile away. We're not talking about that. We're talking about being able to capture a pallet ID that's maybe 2 feet away or 3 feet away or 1 meter away. And that's a very, very different kind of tag. It has no battery, from what I understand. It's a tiny device. And so the technology is moving in the right direction as well. So if we get an intersection with low cost, fit for purpose RFID tags coming in from one side, and if we get the ability for such technology to enable the airlines to collect accurately and efficiently demurrage on their equipment, yes, then I think my answer is yes. Bob did have a slide about RFID. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yes, Christine, yes, RFID is, quite honestly, 6 months ago, if somebody had asked me about RFID, I would have said, really? You sure? We've been through this. It was miserable. I'm now quite open-minded about RFID, and I'm looking more closely at how this technology might be quite, not the final contribution, but might be a significant contributor.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
As Bob said, RFID was already an old topic when I joined that industry. And I think that horse has really beaten to death over the years, but it seems to still be alive. And who knows what comes out of it. I mean, if we look at the EUCR and that process, if that works properly, then there is also not that much of a need, for instance, for tracking devices, because at least within that process, then you know where the ULD is. And if it got lost, then you know who to make responsible for it.
Yeah.
Because it's clearly assigned who has touched it last time. Yeah. So that if the process is a closed loop, then it kind of makes the tracking efforts a little bit obsolete or redundant. Yeah. So any more questions or input ideas? Because as I said, at least the two apps which we talked about last, the contour check and the damage limits or damage inspection part, is still more or less just an idea, and we hope it is a helpful idea when it turns into life, but we don't know. We need the feedback from you guys, and I think we are quite ahead of time.
There's another question from Alan Glenn. I think it's in the answered section for some reason. So click on
that. Alan, for which app? What we know is let's quickly go through. Wind app is available in different document file formats from the website. The Strap Angle app is currently available only for Apple iOS. I think, first of all, we have to get the new version running, or Blair, and then probably the next step is to make that also available for Android. Bob, on the EUCR, I don't know the status. Can you say something about
Yeah,
that?
no, that will run on in its current beta version. It will run on both.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, talking about Android, again, this I'm learning all the time. Android phones have the capability to process RFID. They don't have the ability to read the signal, but once the signal is captured on a plug-on device, the Android system will process RFID.
Okay.
So it's a very, very interesting development.
Yeah, and then as the damage inspection app is a kind of a hooked up to the EUCR report, hopefully, then of course that also will be available in both. And the contour check app, I think the target is anyhow to make whatever we do available in both systems, because these are the systems you have to use, right? So yeah, I think that typically we have to cover both.
Yeah, I've seen a comment here from Alan saying Android is popular for many handheld scanners in the ground handling environment. Yep. That doesn't surprise me, Alan. I think, and as I say, I just learned that Android has the ability to process RFID data. It needs the reader part, but that's just sort of like a bolt-on. Yeah, it's a very, you're right. And I don't know, I think Blair did the Strap app in iOS because he was more comfortable with doing it in iOS, but we know that it won't be that challenging to move it to Android.
Yeah. I mean, the real challenging part is what I mentioned in the plenary discussion session, that the manpower and money, but money only because we don't have in-house expertise on these IT technologies. Bob has really went deep into the details. Nevertheless, I don't think that he considers himself an expert able to create such an app. I have no clue how to create an app. So we have to get external support. Yeah, this is probably the biggest challenge we have to work with. Yeah. Okay. If there are no further questions, what I still would like to do is encourage everybody who still has some time to go back into that demonstration room for specifically on that EUCR.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a separate room. So it's a bit more extended version than the slides Bob has just went through as part of this group here. Yeah.
And if I can just add to that, Ulf, that actually includes a demonstration of a RFID reader scanning, I think 9 or 10 tags stuck on a cupboard wall instantaneously.
Okay. Yeah.
It's quite impressive.
Okay, good. Okay, I think then we have covered everything. And again, if you don't come up right now with whatever idea you might have, whenever it pops up, send it to Uld Care, the contacts you have. Yeah, we are really looking forward to some more ideas to work on in the future. Other than that, I think that's it. Thanks for everybody.